This is Dr. Leonard, your instructor for Geography and Religious Studies 207, Biblical Geography. And in the last slideshow, we looked just a little bit at what the popular notion of geography is, in the sense that I wanted to introduce to you the subject of biblical geography and why geography is applicable to the study of the Bible. And so we looked at Wikipedia, kind of what those editors think is geography, mostly somehow physical parts of the environment. And so then we asked the question, what's geography got to do with the Bible? Well, I thought one way to illustrate how that would work would be to take some themes that geographers talk about and apply those to biblical studies just as an overview. And of course, we would get into more detail as the class progresses. So first off, physical geography, just from Wikipedia, you might say. That is a part of geography, an important part of geography. So here you have a map on the right-hand side of vegetation in biblical times. And again, you probably can't see the legend, but the greens represent some, green growth. Darker is forest, lighter is grasses or shrubs. The yellow represents sand, and the sort of brown represents desert, with the dark bluish representing oases found in the desert. But anyway, I got a couple Bible verses for you. In Exodus chapter 3, verse 8, the Bible says, "So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites." And so here the Bible comments on the type of economy, the type of maybe natural conditions that will be encountered by the Jews when they depart from Egypt and wind up in Canaan. And then contrast that with Numbers chapter 11, verse 5, where the Jews are complaining about their conditions when they're wandering in the wilderness for a while after they've departed Egypt. And they look back and they say, "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost. Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic." And so what you have here is a contrast of what agricultural conditions prevail in Egypt with what was going to prevail in Canaan. So in Egypt, you have the Nile River, the Nile, a huge source of water, and lands about the Nile, very fertile and irrigated to provide year-round agriculture. So things like, sort of garden products, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic, those are the things that would have been common and in abundant supply in Egypt because of the year-round agriculture based on the Nile River. Now they're going to enter a land instead that flows with milk and honey. And so what those two terms indicate is that the milk part would be, pastoral. That would be animal tending. So you've got cows and goats that produce milk. And the honey part is probably an indication of things like vineyards. In fact, the word honey is not really clear what it means in the original. It probably means something like grape syrup, something sweet. And honey is possible in the land of Canaan, but most likely that word is indicating the grapevines that would have been in abundance in Canaan, more so than honey. In fact, honey is very rarely mentioned, but grapes and wine production are mentioned frequently. So you get the difference in the economy. So you've got one that's based on irrigated agriculture year round, and you've got another one based on running your animals from here to there in grasslands and no major river. And so physical geography helps us understand what these two passages mean in contrast with each other. You've got God promising on the one hand a new land, good and spacious, flowing with milk and honey, but that's totally different than the experience than the Jews were used to while they were captives in Egypt. This is back to the table of contents. So maybe chapters 3 and 4 in the geography textbook, the college level geography textbook, would kind of fit into this category. And we'll cover these things in this class. Another theme in geography are human systems or human geography. In this case, I've got here on the screen, and it was the only one I could find, but it's in French. But you get the idea. And that is during the late Bronze Age, the Egyptians had more or less sway over over Canaan. And there's a list of letters that they found at a place called El Amarna. And these letters are sort of like letters from these Canaanite city states, sort of like a mayor or a governor writing back to Egypt complaining or commenting about what's going on. And so based on that, it seems pretty clear that they were appealing to the authority of Egypt to sort of settle disputes, etc. And they were interacting with the more powerful country of Egypt. But because all these cities are named in these letters, it becomes clear what the political geography was at the time of the late Bronze Age. Now, late Bronze Age would coincide with the time when the Jews left Egypt and began to migrate into what's today Canaan, or what was called Canaan. Even back then, it was called Canaan. And so you have a political geography map. Each of these cities would have controlled a territory surrounding the cities. So this is the world that the Hebrews encountered as they left Egypt and entered Canaan. Here's another, this is the repeat of that economic geography map. So you've got, maybe you can see a little bit better now because I've blown it up, but you can see large zones of wheat production. You've got olive groves that are shown here. Forests, it was forested back in ancient times, although again, deforestation was common even back then. Fish production, you've got things, I'm trying to read the legend myself. Some dyes, these little things that look like shells would have been things that were extracted from the ocean to produce purple dyes for clothing. Cattle, sheep, goats, etc., being produced around. So this is a map showing you that if, certain areas of the country supported certain types of economic activity. And you'll notice that the Jordan River, which runs from the Sea of Galilee here to the Dead Sea here, this Jordan River was not really a focus of production. It's a small river, maybe only in some places 10 feet wide. I had the good fortune to visit last summer, and we stopped at a national park, which is right here at the north side of the Sea of Galilee, the lake here. And you could almost, not quite, jump across the Jordan. Now, it was fast flowing. There's a good amount of water in it. In fact, the place where we stopped had kayaking, so you could kayak down the Jordan River, but it was a very narrow river. And again, as it flows through the desert, not necessarily a focus. And that, I'm not to say that there was no agricultural production around the Jordan, which is not true. There was, and there still is, even today. But it wasn't like the Nile. It wasn't that productive. So other areas of the country tended to have different types of agriculture. And so this is the human system, right? So you've got spatial variation or spatial differences in agricultural activities. And so here I've got outlined in blue from chapters 5 to chapter 11, human systems. So cultures would be things like language, religion, economy that we just looked at on the last slide, political geography that we looked at on the last slide, etc. And we'll get into cities and we'll get into population as we go through the class. Another theme of geography is where is something, location. And I've got here a Google Earth map showing you the latitude and longitude of the modern countries, but you get the idea. Back then, location is location. Where on planet Earth are we talking about? You will have a few map quizzes that ask you to identify locations in antiquity, just so we get familiar with those things. And perhaps that's what you think of when you think of geography, because you probably had 50 state map quiz when you were in public school. And some people will say, I never was good at geography. And when I hear that, I think, well, maybe you don't know what geography is, because most of us, our experience in school was map quizzes. And if you got a bad grade on the map quiz, you came away with the impression that you were no good at geography, whereas that's, a very minor part of what geography is and what geographers do. So absolute location is where on planet Earth are we talking about? Here's an example from the Bible. So you had Jonah in chapter 1, where the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. So you've got here Nineveh marked on the map at lower right, and you've got Tarshish marked on the map at the left. Actually, Tarshish probably was on the island of Sardinia, which is right here, based on what I've read. Traditionally, it's been thought of as part of Spain, but really probably it was on the island of Sardinia. Anyway, the idea is, in absolute terms, he was supposed to go sort of to the northeast, and he fled to the west, or attempted to do that, if you know the story. So that's an idea of how absolute location enhances our understanding of biblical passages. Another element of location is relative location. That is, what's around it. So now we're not looking where on planet Earth it is, but now that we've established where it is, what else is around it? So you have here maps on the right and on the bottom left that indicate the geographic context of Canaan. So in Exodus chapter 33, verse 2, I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And so some of those nations are on this map on the right. So Hittites was an empire centered on modern-day Turkey. Midianites, you might have heard of that term. You can see them kind of down here by the Red Sea. You've heard of Mount Sinai. Here it is. Here's Egypt here. Syria, which is today a modern country, but in antiquity was also a power, is here. And the Jews would have had interaction with the Syrians. Off the map to the east would have been the Babylonian Empire, etc. And so you get the geographic context. That's the idea of relative location, what's around it. And then here at the lower left is another map similar to it, showing you a little bit more detail. So the Kingdom of Israel, Aram, Arameans, Assyrians, Ammon at the lower center there, and Phoenician city-states and so forth on the northwest coast here. So you get the idea of what's around a certain location. Another idea or theme that comes up in geography is place. That is, once you know where a place is and what's around it, then what's the place like? And I give you an example from Numbers chapter 13, comparing the Negev, which is the southern desert part of the country. You can see it listed on the map right here, with the rest of the countryside up here, kind of the central part of the area of Canaan. And it says in Numbers chapter 13, so they went up and explored the land. So this is to give you some context. When the Jews arrived to invade, basically, or to conquer Canaan, they sent spies, and the spies left from the Negev, which is the desert area here in the south, and they explored all the way to the north of the land. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. Two of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. And so here we have these people exploring for the first time the area that they are intending to conquer, and they're in a desert. And so they think it's awesome that there's this huge grape production going on here in this land. So they bring back an example of it. So there you get the idea that, Canaan is going to be a land of vineyards. It's going to be a land of grape production and other things they would have noticed when they were there. So you get this contrast of desert versus, the production. And obviously it was way, sort of a better deal than living in the desert. Here's a picture of the desert area in Canaan. I think this is near Beersheba, or maybe somewhere in the Negev, somewhere in the southern desert. And you can see the conditions that prevail there, way different than the conditions that would prevail in the area that they are targeting to enter and migrate to. Here's another picture, a couple of pictures for you about what places are like. And sometimes we'll have to rely on sort of reconstructions, because this is not modern day. We're talking about biblical times. So on the left, you have a person's conception of what Capernaum would have been like. Capernaum was the town that became the adopted hometown of Jesus. And so you had fishing, it was a fishing village along the shore, and you had sort of blocks of homes. You had a synagogue in the center. That's this building right here. Again, I was fortunate enough to visit Capernaum when I was there. And the first century synagogue, all that's left is the foundation stones. And there was another synagogue built later on top of it, but it's still there to see. And the town has been excavated, so you can. The buildings are gone, of course, but their foundations are still there, and you can see those. And then here on the right-hand side, this is a modern picture, but these are our shepherds, modern shepherds, and you can see, the landscape, right? So you get a feel. It's not, and you can see this mountain in the background. It's not like in West Virginia, if you're from West Virginia, that's tree clad. You've got these olives or some other kind of dry trees that grow in dry climates showing up here, and you've got farmers, herders, shepherds. Another theme of geography is human environment interaction. In the old days, man-land interaction. And I've got a couple of examples for you. Here is Beersheba. Ancient Beersheba, of course, is in the Negev. It's kind of on the edge of the desert. And so they had to have water supply. So what they would do is a nearby wadi, that is, a wadi is a stream that only flows when it rains. So rains hard, the wadi flows with water, and then, a month later, it's dried up. But anyway, so they would take the water, they would diverted it from the nearby wadi to an underground reservoir. And here's there's a huge deep shaft that led down to this water supply. So you've got human beings find themselves in a dry climate, and they're trying to adapt. They're trying to take use or make best use they can of the resources available. Here is a picture of terraces. Now, this is a modern picture, but it shows the ancient terraces. So you live in a hilly, rugged country, but you need flat ground for agricultural production. So you build you a little wall, another one lower down the hillside, another one lower down the hillside. And this is common other places around the world in hill country. And you get flat ground where you can put your plants, and agriculture can continue on that flat part. It also helps to retain water by building these walls. So human beings interacting with what they find in the landscape to take care of themselves. And here's a couple of chapters in the geography textbook table of contents that would have to do with both human beings taking advantage of natural resources and perhaps human beings having an impact on the natural environment. Another theme of geography is movement. And in biblical geography, of course, let me just point out upper right, this picture here is included for my benefit because tea is my favorite beverage. And this is some people in Sri Lanka picking tea leaves. Tea is not able to be grown very well in the United States. So I have to rely on economic geography. That is, people picking it in one location, packing it up, and sending it by ship or however to my part of the world so that I can enjoy that drink. And so this is the idea of movement. So this is a movement of products. Here in the central map, you have the movement of people. So after the Assyrians invaded, they deported Jews to parts of their empire. And after the Babylonians invaded a few century or so later, they deported more Jews out of Canaan to other parts of their empire. And so this map shows the movement of people in and out of Canaan when they were conquered by neighboring empires. Another theme of geography are regions. And this is probably something familiar to most people. Notice on the upper right, the map is natural regions. So you have the coastal plain, you have the hill country, you have the Rift Valley, this purple color here, and you have the hills, eastern hills, east of the Jordan River. And these are called natural regions. So they would be regions that share a common vegetation growth, common wildlife, common soil types, perhaps common topography. And they would be in this map. It's called natural regions. In the central map, you have the 12 tribes of Israel. So when the Jews entered Canaan, they were instructed to split up the land into various chunks, and each of the 12 tribes would get a chunk of land, and these are the chunks. So there are regions that were created, in this case, by the Bible itself or by Joshua and Moses as they gave instructions to the Jews. And they would have split up the country into these regions of sort of ownership. The different tribes would own the land in those parts of the world, parts of Canaan. Another theme of geography, of course, this has been apparent because we've done this over and over again, are maps, map interpretation, mapping technologies. And of course, we're going to look at zillions of maps in this class because it conveys the science of where, right? That's geography, the science of where. And so geography looks at maps as a way to analyze the distribution of things on the surface of the earth. And of course, interpreting those maps is going to be a part of this class, and also mapping technology. So we're going to use some, in this class, we'll use some online mapping technologies. In one case, I'm going to have you guys to create your own sort of map of some Bible story to illustrate what's going on. But that's later in the class. And of course, there's a chapter in this geography textbook, college level textbook, that talks about geographic analysis, and that would include various tools like maps and technology tools.